I'm David Scandura.
And I'm Justice Burkett.
And today we're here to find out, is Prince of Darkness the greatest movie ever made?
I've got a message for you, and you're not going to like it.
Welcome to The Greatest Movie Ever Made, the show where we watch a movie and tell you if it's the greatest movie ever made.
That's what we do here.
A movie that is so thoroughly compelling and entertaining that while you're watching it, it's the only thing that matters in the world. I'm joined as always by my co-host and tube of Satanic Baja Blast, Justus Burkett.
What's up? What's good? We started we're recording on Labor Day. This episode's going to come out in October, which, by the way, welcome to spooky season, motherfuckers. We're going to be doing horror movies all month because it's October, baby. It's my favorite time of year. We're getting into the Halloween season, and I'm excited for it. But so we're recording this on Labor Day, and R.I.P. Jimmy Buffett has just recently passed.
Yeah.
So we're having margaritas for our 11 a.m. record.
Yeah, so you may hopefully it will enhance the podcast experience.
We were also drinking for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, our first episode, and I feel like the drinking maybe was beneficial to the tenor of the conversation on that one. We'll see how it goes.
But yeah, we're doing a whole slate of movies for Halloween. This will be our first annual. I didn't think of a name for this.
Yeah, I don't know if we can maybe workshop it.
Halloween Horror-thon. I did not, in fact, steal that from Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, We Hate Movies, which is a podcast that we're both fans of, another movie podcast, a much more successful and good movie podcast.
And funny.
That we're both fans of. They do the Spooktacular, so we know we can't do Spooktacular because that's their thing. The Creepathon. I don't know. Anyway, we're talking about horror movies.
It's 11 a.m.
Yeah.
I don't have time to think.
It's 11 a.m. and I've had half a margarita and my brain is just soup at this point. Which is that's a great state to be starting a podcast in. Anyway, but yeah, horror movies all October. As we talked about on the TCM2 episode, David and I, both big horror movie guys. Me, especially a big horror movie guy. Like that's pretty much all I watch. Outside of the podcast. So I'm excited to be getting into this string of episodes where we're going to be talking about some of our faves.
And we saw a good horror movie recently. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So David and I went to see Talk to Me, which is the newest horror offering distributed by A24. And I really fucking liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It's an Australian film, kind of a new Gen Z, like social media era spin on the old school kind of possession movie concept, and just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and I was a little skeptical of it going in because you say that Gen Z possession supernatural movie, and I just roll my fucking eyes. But I was genuinely shocked at how good it was. And of course I'd heard like huge hype about it, and then also people saying, it's not that good. So I was expecting to sort of temper my expectations and land somewhere in the middle. But it's the best horror movie I've seen this year.
Yeah.
I guess maybe other than Infinity Pool, I wouldn't necessarily consider Infinity Pool to be a horror movie, but some people are saying that. But yeah, I think we've also seen Evil Dead Rise, and what was the other? There was another big one that we saw this year. Oh, Scream 6 was another big horror movie that we went to go see, and I think Talk to Me was pretty incredible, honestly.
I would agree that I think I liked it more than I liked either Evil Dead Rise or Scream 6, but I enjoyed both of those movies as well. Yeah. Like I think that it's been a pretty decent year for horror at the movie theater. Like big budget horror getting like theatrical releases. It's been like a decent year for that, I feel like. And Talk to Me is not big budget. It's like a little indie one. And it also just kind of blew me away. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. And I would highly recommend, if you're looking for scary things to watch in October, if that's out on streaming, which I don't know if it will be yet. It's probably not in the theaters anymore by the time this episode's coming out. But if it's out on streaming and you haven't seen it yet, I would highly recommend giving it a watch, even if you're not a huge horror person, because it's creepy and disturbing and scary, but it's not like a super high jump scare movie. So I think that if you're kind of a casual horror fan, or maybe even like just getting into it, I don't think it's going to be too scary for you. And I think that it is going to be, it's also really like funny and fun. So I think it's like kind of a good little spooky season treat for you if you're looking for that.
And I'm not the biggest fan of like haunting or possession movies, just because I think the tropes have been so overdone in those specifically, as opposed to other subgenres of horror. So I think if you're not as into horror because of that reason, if you're aware of the tropes and you're not interested in them, I think Talk to Me does a good job of getting around those tropes. There's still some stuff in there where, someone's there and then they look back and they're gone, but you're not waiting for the jump scare, you're not waiting for the noise that's going to scare you. It's really efficiently paced and really well thought out, and just mean as fuck. Just so mean to its characters, and I love when a horror movie does that.
Yeah. So that's probably enough about Talk to Me, but just suffice to say, it's a recommend from both of us.
Yeah, for sure.
So David, you usually ask me this question.
Okay.
But how are you doing?
I'm very sad that Jimmy Buffett died.
Yeah.
I'm surprised how much it hit me. I'm not even like the biggest fan of his music. I sort of recently got into him as a joke, and then just kept listening to him and ended up really appreciating what he did. And I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but just like a musician who made the music that he wanted to make for the people that he loved, and also came from a play, he loved country music. He really loved country music, and I think a lot of people write him off as just a novelty with like Margaritaville and Cheeseburger in Paradise and all of these kind of yacht rock, sipping on a beach, drinking margarita songs. But he has a lot of diversity in, especially his early catalog. He does folk, he does, more traditional country. He's all over the map, really. So otherwise, I'm doing well, but that was a bit of a shock this weekend. But it's Labor Day. Jimmy would want us to be drinking margaritas at 11 a.m. on Labor Day, so that's what I'm doing.
Which is what we're doing. That's what we're doing. So like I this week am doing pretty good. Like we said before, it's Labor Day, and I'm off of work this whole week. I just decided to take the entire week off. So that's like nice and relaxing, and I'm in a good headspace because of it. Also, we're getting into fall again. This episode's going to come out in October, but right now it's September, and so like the fall stuff is just starting. Pumpkin spice is out everywhere. I'm being a basic bitch about it. I'm like drinking all the pumpkin spice coffee that I can handle. And I have like a thing that I wanted to do in these October episodes, where I have been wanting to do some spooky media recommendations, because it's the spooky season. And like I said before, this is my favorite time of year. So we already got Talk to Me as a movie, so I'm going to go ahead and let that one be mine for this episode. But I also wanted to do an album recommendation and a podcast recommendation for just spooky media. For the album recommendation this week in October, I'm going to recommend that you and also our listeners listen to Let the Earth Be Silent by the band Funerals. And it's Funerals with like a V as the U. Funerals. But they're like a doom metal band. And it's like a really dark, atmospheric, kind of creepy doom metal record that came out this year. So that's my spooky album recommendation. And then my spooky podcast recommendation, I'm into a lot of horror podcasts. I like a lot of horror fiction podcasts. And I highly recommend that you and our listeners listen to the podcast Campfire Radio Theater. They do like really well-produced audio horror. And specifically the episode called Blood Puppets is like a really excellent piece of horror fiction podcasting. So if you're looking for things to get you into the Halloween spirit, and you're looking to maybe, you can't sit down and watch a movie, but you want to be kind of in that creepy, spooky mood while you're working or whatever, listening to that album or that podcast are good places for you to go. So I think I'm going to keep doing this throughout October. I'm going to do like a movie rec, a movie/TV show rec, a podcast rec, and an album rec for things that people might want to get them spooked out.
Yeah, I have a couple okay movies to recommend, because sometimes I think it's okay to watch an okay movie. And it's nice sometimes to recognize what a movie does well as opposed to what it doesn't do well. Those movies are Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 and Pandorum. I hate the first Rob Zombie Halloween movie. I think it's a big pile of shit. It's been a few months since I watched it. But I think this second one did a good job correcting some of the problems, specifically with the Michael Myers character and the Laurie Strode character. I'm not quite like fully on the side of like the apologists, because I know this movie has a bit of a cult fan base, but I also know a lot of people who put it at the bottom of their Halloween ranking, and I don't think it's that bad. I think it's all right. It's violent as fuck too. It's super gory. The goriest one in the series up to the point that it was released. I haven't seen the new one, so I can't speak for those. But yeah, I thought it was all right. And Pandorum, I love Alien. I love science fiction horror films. So I always am endeared towards a trashy Alien ripoff. And this one was a pretty fun time. There's also quite a bit of influence from Event Horizon in this one. It's kind of the prequel to Event Horizon in some ways.
Event Horizon, by the way, a movie that will eventually get an episode on this podcast, and that might be, if today is not it, the episode where I kill David on microphone. Because we have very differing feelings about that movie. I think Event Horizon fucking rules.
I will withhold my opinion on Event Horizon until we get there.
Yeah. You can infer,
but it's safe
difference.
to say it's not even like I hate it. It's just one that I struggle with a little bit more.
We'll talk about it on the episode. On the eventual Event Horizon episode, which again might be the last episode of this podcast.
but yeah, Pandorum takes a lot of things that really work for me in Event Horizon, and just I don't know. I thought it's a little bit long, but I thought it was a fun watch last night. So let's get into today's movie.
Yes, the movie for episode 6, and go ahead and triple that and make it a 666 because the devil's in a tube of goop, baby.
We're talking about Prince of Darkness from 1987, directed by God Emperor John Carpenter.
Yes, this podcast's favorite director, probably John Carpenter.
Yeah, I mean, like, where do we start? Like, okay, we're going to tell the story of John Carpenter multiple times over the course of this podcast, because I look at his movies and basically any of them are candidates for this podcast, and I would say maybe 3, 4, 5 of them are candidates for the greatest movie ever made, for sure.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think one of his movies in particular for me is sort of that thing we talked about on the first episode a little bit when we were introducing the idea of the podcast, where it's like sometimes we may be talking about a movie as the greatest movie ever made, and it might go beyond kind of the facetious judgment of this podcast's definition of that term to actually be like, no, this is literally one of the greatest films ever made. Like not just in the terms of like, your description up top, but right. Like this is like a crowning achievement of cinema as an art form. And for me, I think Carpenter has at least made one of those movies, which for me is the thing, which we might ultimately do an episode on at some point. But yeah,
and not to shit on horror directors, because I love horror directors, but Carpenter feels, especially for this era that he was operating in at his prime, the 80s, he feels different. He feels like a director who has a degree of some pedigree to him. He has real cinematic influences and real talent and skill behind the camera in a way that some of his contemporaries maybe didn't. And also in a way that I think the maybe went unrecognized by a lot of the film community at the time.
Yeah, I definitely think he's a guy whose reputation has and just kind of the critical community and society as a whole has gained a lot of appreciation for him in retrospect, right? A lot of the accolades, and I would just mention The Thing, that's a movie that came out and was kind of received tepidly, right? And is now widely regarded as one of the best horror movies that anyone has ever made in the history of the genre, right? And I think you're right. I think that he was a little ahead of things. He was kind of on the cutting edge a little bit in a way that maybe didn't get him recognized to the degree that he deserved, in his own time.
Yeah, and he definitely had his successes, but I think he's had just as many flops that went on to become cult hits later, like The Thing, like Big Trouble in Little China, and also, was kind of ran through the ringer of Hollywood and always was kind of under the thumb of the studios, and by the 90s is just totally sick and cynical, and retires in the early 2000s, comes back and does one more film in 2010, I believe, and has since then been retired from directing and just making music and collecting checks for remakes of his movies and smoking weed and playing video games.
Which I love for him.
Yeah.
People are oh, I wish Carpenter would come back and direct something. And to some degree, as a Carpenter fan, I do too. However, I'm also just let the man be retired. It seems like he's having a great time. He's made all the masterpieces that I need him to. It's fine with me if he never comes back and makes another movie, because it's it seems like he's having a good time, and I want that for him.
Yeah, I would love another Carpenter movie, but I think he's made so many great movies, and this one that we're going to talk about comes in the middle of, I would say, one of the best 10-year-ish runs from any director in film history.
Yes, and this is one of the highlights of that run.
We'll get to that. So this run has Assault on Precinct 13, Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, The Thing, Christine, Starman, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness, the film we're talking about today, They Live. And then he takes a few years off and comes back in the 90s. But this, again, looking at this, quite a few of these I could make the argument for being the greatest movie ever made. He's a director who excels with simple premises and building atmosphere, working with small budgets. And Prince of Darkness comes out in 1987 after the huge financial failure of Big Trouble in Little China. He signs a deal with Alive Pictures for 2 movies for $3 million. And those movies are this and then They Live. And this makes $14 million. They Live also makes $14 million. So these are both decent successes for him. Mm-hmm. I think this film has not enjoyed the cult status of They Live and the continued love. I think it's one that people say is underrated, and now the thing that everyone knows about Prince of Darkness is that it's underrated. So maybe it's just properly rated at this point.
That's fair. It's a good thing to know about this movie that it's underrated, because I feel like that it makes more people interested in watching it, and I just think more people should see this movie.
I would agree.
Yeah.
This is the second of his so-called Apocalypse trilogy, mm-hmm. which includes The Thing and In the Mouth of Madness. And The Thing gets a lot of the praise, but I think this and In the Mouth of Madness, which I probably like more than this movie.
In the Mouth of Madness also fucking rules.
They're both really fun movies.
To me, that Apocalypse trilogy, The Thing, In the Mouth of Madness, The Thing, Prince of Darkness, if we're going chronologically, and then in the Mouth of Madness, to me, are not his three masterpieces, because there are a couple other of his films that I would call masterpieces, but I think that it's his crowning achievement, the Apocalypse trilogy. And I'm probably in the minority for thinking that. Because I feel like In the Mouth of Madness and Prince of Darkness, people will be like, oh, those movies are better than people give them credit for. But a lot of people won't go as far as I do with both of those movies, which is I think both of them are the greatest movie ever made. Spoiler alert. But I'm not. I've already tipped my hand on this, so I'm just gonna, be upfront about it. I fucking love this movie. I love this movie so much, and I think it's so fun and so inventive and so cool. And same deal with In the Mouth of Madness. I am not going to honestly, propose to anybody that either of those movies, either Prince of Darkness or In the Mouth of Madness, are better than like Halloween, or even better than like They Live or Escape from New York, right? Like I'm like, okay, if you look at the movie as like an objective piece of art, right? And you're like, okay, like the cinematography is like this and the editing is like that and the music is like this, and you try and grade those things on any kind of like objective scale, then I can see the argument that like maybe these movies are not among his best. However, art is subjective. It is not objective, right? And for me, Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness just hit a part of the core of my being. Both of those movies that it achieves something inexplicable within me specifically as a viewer. These movies were made for me. This movie today, Prince of Darkness, was made specifically for me. Like I am perfectly positioned as a human being for this to just land and for me to be like, fucking 5 stars, I don't care. You can talk to me about its flaws and I will probably agree with you. And yet, I would not change a fucking frame of this movie.
Well, they're all thematically linked, more so than narratively linked. It's a trilogy in a very loose sense, but they're all about just before the end of the world,
right,
which is really interesting.
All three of them imagine a possible beginning to the end of the world.
Yeah.
Right? Like the movie itself, the movie The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness are all basically the opening act to the end of the world. And you don't actually see the world end in any of them. But basically in each movie, it's like, this could be how the world ends, or this could be how the world ends. And I love that as an idea.
Yeah, and I think thematically this might be the most interesting of them. Carpenter was influenced by quantum physics. He was reading a book about quantum physics and thought about merging that with religion to come up with this idea of the ultimate antiparticle is also like the origin of evil for humankind.
That idea fucking rules. It fucking rules. It's so exactly my shit, because it's like, what if the scientists among us and the religious leaders and the new age esotericists, right, and every kind of study of philosophy, what if that's all intertwined and we're all actually talking about the same thing, right? And what if it isn't science versus religion? It's like you need science to understand religion, and vice versa is kind of what the core idea that's being played with here is, which is like, what if everybody's right and it's all the same thing, right? And it hits so perfectly for me, because that's almost exactly where I'm like at. Not to get too woo on the podcast, but it's like things like the universal unconsciousness, where it's like we are all sort of part of one collective mind, right? And what you think of as like the self is essentially just a physical manifestation of consciousness that connects us all and that we're just all a part of, right? And we like, when our physical body is made, we are pulled from it and then we return to it when we die and stuff like that, right? Where it's like kind of a religious idea, but like sort of a theoretical physics idea, right? Shit like that, like it just it hooks me really, really hard. And so like anytime this movie is talking about the physical embodiment of evil, and it's also an alien, but it's also the devil and all that. It just I'm fucking fascinated, and I'm glad the movie doesn't spoon feed it to you and give you all the answers. It just introduces the question. It's just I love it so much.
And I'll go ahead and put my cards on the table and create a hostile environment in the podcast room today. That is an amazing, great, gripping, compelling idea that I feel like the movie never fully lives up to.
I disagree.
And Carpenter has a few of those where, because of the budget, he doesn't quite live up to the premise. I think like Escape from New York is another one of those where you kind of think to yourself, if this had a bigger budget, this would be a better movie. I love Escape from New York. Of course, when he gets a bigger budget, he makes Escape from LA. But
if this movie had a bigger budget, though, I feel like it wouldn't be as effective, because if this movie had a bigger budget, it would be less focused on quiet conversations between grad students looking at research, and it would be more focused on big budget visuals. And I think that would be to the movie's detriment, because then it would be exploring these themes even less.
No, you're right. I should clarify. I don't necessarily think the issues with this movie are budget. I think it is kind of in the script. Budget would help, but I think like he does with a lot of movies, he does make a good use of the budget here. But I think we should probably just get into the movie.
Yeah,
now
we should just talk about it
before we murder each other with opinions.
I'm like over here rolling my eyes at everything David's saying. I'm like, okay, all right.
And I want to be clear. I like the movie. It's a good movie. You should watch this movie.
Yes, everybody should watch this movie, and that we agree on that.
Justus just wants to kill me right now.
So the movie starts. I think it's goofy when the Universal Studios does the new logo and then the old logo on an older Universal release.
Oh.
This is a Universal Pictures release,
Okay.
and they do like the new version of the logo, and then the next thing you see is just the old Universal logo, and I'm like, fucking pick one, guys. But anyway.
So we have the world's longest opening credits.
Yes, opening credits go on for 11 minutes, and they're intercut with basically all of our character introductions.
Yeah.
And we get the John Carpenter font in these opening credits, which is a classic staple of his films. He always uses kind of the same font for his opening credits. And just the biggest fucking banger of a score that has ever been used during an opening credits sequence.
Yeah, the score is great in this movie.
It goes so fucking hard.
It basically runs the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think I could pick out a theme as easily as I could with Halloween or something like that. But he just underscores the tension in this movie so well with that score.
Yeah, this opening credits score, it's like and it's like it just builds so much like dread. It like lets you know that because what you're seeing is like scenes of like priests walking around and like classrooms where a physics professor is lecturing or whatever. But with this like really ominous, really like menacing synth score over it, you're like, oh, some bad shit is about to happen, even though like what you're actually seeing visually is pretty innocuous.
Yeah, so it starts off with, and again, we're cutting back and forth, so we'll kind of do the two parts of this story that eventually connect, where this priest named Father Carlton dies, kind of holding onto this box, and they bring Priest. His name is Priest. He is credited as Priest. The priest played by the late great Donald Pleasance.
Donald Pleasance in this movie. This is the first Donald Pleasance appearance on this podcast, and it will not be the last.
Yeah. He discovers this journal and this box left by this dead priest, where he reads about something called the Brotherhood of Sleep, and this key in the box leads him to a church in downtown LA, and that key specifically opens the basement.
When I saw the priest order, the monk order or whatever was called the Brotherhood of Sleep, I was like, hell yeah, brother, 420 plays it. Yeah, are these the weed priests from
Dope Smoker?
From Dope Smoker. It would be cool if they were. Unfortunately, they seem to just be regular priests and not Dune-esque sci-fi figures who smoke weed in spacesuits.
Yeah.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine.
We're also introduced to Professor B-Rock, who's played by Victor Wong, who's returning from Big Trouble in Little China.
Yes, Victor Wong rules in this movie. It's one of my favorite performances in any John Carpenter movie. Victor Wong is so fucking good in
Okay.
this movie.
I think he's good, but I don't know if I would go so far as to say one of my favorites in a Carpenter movie, because I think he's so much more memorable in Big Trouble for me. Like, he has more of a presence in that movie, and I think in this movie it's more of an ensemble.
It is a very ensemble cast movie. Like, there's not really a lead in this movie.
Right.
The reason I like this performance so much is because it's very understated to me. It's very much he is playing like a college physics professor, and he's not doing anything big or broad, but like there are scenes where he's like getting really excited about the science, and it just reads as so like authentic and like realistic, right? And I buy him as like a total genius, you know. But he's not playing like a caricature of like a genius scientist. He just seems like a guy who's really into his field, right? I love the authenticity of this performance is, I guess, the thing for me.
Yeah. He's talking to his students. He's not really teaching a lesson so much as he is just kind of monologuing to them. I did write this down because there's a point I want to make about it. So I'll read this quote in full that plays during these opening credits. Let's talk about our beliefs and what we can learn from them. We believe nature is solid and time a constant. Matter has substance and time a direction. There is truth in flesh and the solid ground. The wind may be invisible, but it's real. Smoke, fire, water, light, they're different. Not as to stone or steel, but they're tangible. And we assume time is narrow because it is as a clock. 1 second is 1 second for everyone. Cause precedes effect. Fruit rots, water flows downstream. We're born, we age, we die. The reverse never happens. None of this is true. Say goodbye to classical reality because our logic collapses on the subatomic level into ghosts and shadows.
How can you read that quote from this script and say that this script has problems? David!
So, have you ever played Metal Gear Solid?
No.
There's this thing that happens in the Metal Gear Solid games where Hideo Kojima kind of blends supernatural elements with real world government, military, espionage elements. So there are references to like DARPA and the CIA and the JFK assassination, like real world things that happen. And sometimes when he brings in those real world elements, it feels like he read the first couple sentences of the Wikipedia article and then decided to make it a thing. Like in one of the games, there's this thing you get called the Fulton Recovery System. That's what it is. The Fulton Recovery System, where you attach a balloon to a soldier and it lifts him up in the air and he floats back to your base and he's a part of your team now. The Fulton Recovery System is a real thing. It does not at all function like that.
You're telling me that in real life you can't just put a balloon on a guy and he is on your team now?
I guess not. So that's what this monologue reminds me of. That's what Carpenter's approach to the science in this movie reminds me of. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. It just feels like he read the first bit of a Wikipedia article on quantum physics. Wikipedia wasn't around back then. But and then decided to make his little spooky horror movie about it.
I think I fully agree with what you're saying, and I see it as unequivocally a good thing. And I think the reason is because I'm very stupid. Because I don't... If this movie got more into the reality of the science stuff that it talks about, the science and the mathematics and all that, I feel like I would be like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about anymore, and you're losing me. They sprinkle in just enough where I'm like, oh, these smart people know what they're talking about. But and it's at a level where I can understand what they're saying and the implications of what they're saying. But they don't go deep enough into the reality of the science and math here, where I start feeling like the movie is smarter than me, a very stupid viewer. So I feel like it like totally works for me that it's like just kind of surface level stuff in this, because if it went too deep, I feel like I'd get disconnected from it. And it like I said, these ideas hook me, and I'm not interested in. I don't want to know why the weird woo-woo shit that I believe is potentially not true. I'm not interested in knowing any more about science and the universe than I currently know. I want to believe my weird, goofy shit. And this movie is like, believe your weird, goofy shit. We're right there with you. This movie also believes weird, goofy shit. And so, like, I don't know. I feel like this movie is directly playing to my stupidity in that way. And I think that is one of the things that is, like, highly effective for me about it.
I think Carpenter excels with simple premises, like we said, and also he's good at not giving you all the answers.
Yeah.
Specifically, like, Michael Myers is just evil in Halloween. There's no real explanation given to that. Christine, the car that kills people, is just evil. There's no Stephen King overwrought, the car is possessed by the ghost of the dead owner bullshit. And weirdly enough, here I want a little bit more specificity from JC. Oh, should mention, he is not credited as the screenwriter, but he did write the script under a pseudonym. So this is his writing.
I don't want more specificity here. If you tell me that in this movie Jesus is an interdimensional ancient alien that came from a parallel universe, and that there's also a parallel universe that Satan came from, and his dad is still there, and his dad is anti-God, that's all I need to know.
See,
I'm in, baby.
See, and I want more. Give me more of that.
Well, I like filling in the rest of those gaps just kind of in my brain, being like, oh, there's like implications there that are fun for me to think about. I feel like if the movie gave me answers, it would be less satisfying for me.
There's another cool thing that's kind of happening during this opening, where there's a lot of shots of like ants kind of swarming, or characters are looking at the moon, or the sun while this ominous music is playing, and we get this sense of like something is changing around the world.
Couple of really big recurring motifs in this movie. One is the like moon thing. It's kind of like there's a recurring visual of the sun with a crescent moon right above it, right? And the sun and moon being kind of in the same shot. You see that a bunch of times, but also bugs, baby. This movie is full of bugs. There's so many bugs all over this movie. It's a creepy crawly good time.
We are introduced to some of our main characters. We have Brian Marsh, played by Jameson Parker. He's if the movie has a protagonist, it's kind of him.
Yes, I called him yassified Tom Atkins.
He does look like Tom Atkins before all the Millers and the whiskey got to him.
Yeah, if you don't know who Tom Atkins is, he's one of David's and my favorite actors. He's just an American icon and should be way more famous than he actually is. But he's kind of iconic for having this mustache look that he rocks, kind of a blonde mustache. And he's comes across as a little sleazy on screen, which this guy who's playing Brian, the reason I called him yassified Tom Atkins is because this guy looks a little bit more cleaned up. And he's also fucking jacked. He's got like he's wearing like his little student outfit early in the movie with his little like short sleeve button up or whatever, and he's serving a lot of bicep. There was like a big bicep vein that I was looking at, and I was like, that guy's fucking shredded. Anyway,
yeah, this movie doesn't have a ton of regulars from Carpenter, aside from Victor Wong, Dennis Dunn, and Donald Pleasance. As far as I know. Oh, and Peter Jason. This is Peter Jason's first movie with John Carpenter, and he does a lot of movies in the later half of Carpenter's career. We also meet Catherine Danforth, played by Lisa Blount, who is kind of the romantic interest for Brian.
And she is more than that, and the movie goes out of its way to show that she's more than that, which I appreciate. This is sort of like a pretty feminist portrayal of again, it's an ensemble cast, but functionally she's sort of the leading lady of this movie, right? And the movie kind of starts out with them like initiating their relationship with Brian being kind of a little sexist to her, and she like shuts that shit down immediately and is like, you can't talk to me that way, basically.
Right.
And he kind of has to put his tail between his legs and be like, hey, I'm really sorry, that came across the wrong way, can we start over, right? And throughout the movie, I feel like the movie is putting her in a position of power a lot of the time, in a way that horror movies in the 80s were not typically doing with their female characters.
Yeah, the movie goes out of its way to mention that like she's a bit of an anomaly for this particular department in college. And I'm surprised that Brian is able to swing a couple dates out of that interaction where he immediately makes a sexist joke and still manages to land a couple of dates with her.
Well, he does look like yassified Tom Atkins, so that's working in his favor. She can't say no to that mustache.
She can't say no to that mustache.
Also, he does seem like he's like legitimately apologetic after she calls him out for kind of being a little bit of a pig at first.
Yeah.
And it kind of ingratiates you to both of them really quickly. And before any of the like real plot stuff gets started, their relationship is already fully established, which I think is a really cool and smart choice, because I feel like trying to balance the romance plot and all the other shit that happens later in this movie at the same time would have been cluttered and messy. So I like that they just like set these people up at the beginning, and you know that they're in a relationship before any of the other stuff happens.
Yeah, but before we get to the main plot, they've already seen each other a couple times. They've slept with each other. There's this implication that like Brian wants to tell her that he loves her, but she kind of shuts it down.
Yeah, she's basically like, I've been burned before.
And they really leave that hanging for the rest of the movie, which is kind of interesting, and it doesn't really come back, or the significance of the relationship doesn't really come back until the very end of the film.
Yeah, the vibe that we get basically after we are done kind of focusing on them and we start getting into the devil in a tube business, is basically they're in what we would call now a situationship, right? Which was not a term that people would have been familiar with in 87. But they're kind of in a situationship, and Brian, it seems like, wants to make it a relationship. And he's getting like a little bit of maybe resistance on that.
We also meet Walter Fong, played by Dennis Dunn, who is returning from Big Trouble in Little China as well. He kind of functions as the comedic relief in this movie.
Also, the Drip King. His outfits are so fucking...
Oh, I did notice.
He is really dripped out in this movie. In the first scene where we meet him, he's wearing like a pink button-down shirt that's like 80s style and like with the big old sleeves, and he's wearing like these super like straight gray slacks that are like he's got the pink shirt like tucked into, and he's wearing them super high, and like white sneakers. And I was like, if you went outside in like LA in this outfit in 2023, people would be like, looking good. Like, and he's got a little chain on. He just looks so he knows how to dress in this movie.
I'm happy to see him again too, because he didn't do a ton of acting roles. He has a pretty short career, and he's one of the best parts of Big Trouble in Little China. I'm not the biggest fan of him in this movie, but he's doing what the script needs of him, and he's still just fun and charming all the same.
I love him in this movie. I think he's so fun and so funny in this movie, and I think the movie desperately needs it, because so much of this movie is like talking heads talking about science and math, and then you have Dennis Dunn in there, and like, yeah, some of what he's doing is like sexually harassing his coworkers, which is not great, but also like the character is being portrayed as a little bit of a scumbag, and you're not supposed to like that he's doing that, right? But he's like keeping it loose, he's like making jokes and stuff, and it's like, it's fun and funny, and I think it really works for me.
So we learn that Professor Burok and the priest have some sort of connection. They used to be friends or something.
They were in a series of televised debates together.
Okay.
Because he's a priest, and so Donald Pleasance is a priest and Victor Wong is a scientist, and they had like priest-scientist televised debates, we learn. And so that's how they know each other. But I like that it's like a friendly rivalry. Like they seem like they like each other, right? Even though the way that they are connected is they've been debating each other academically.
Yeah, the priest writes to the professor right after he goes to the church and starts learning about this thing that is kept off screen at this point. We don't know much about it. So they meet up at the church, and they talk about the journal, and the priest goes into the first kind of another one of these big exposition dumps of this movie. This is a very talky movie from John Carpenter. That the Father Carlton, who died, lived at this monastery for years, basically by himself after it had closed, and opened this basement door every day. The monastery had been there since the 1500s, and there was this sect of priests called the Brotherhood of Sleep, who had taken a vow of silence that the Vatican didn't know about. And after the head of the Brotherhood died, they would pass on that role to another priest. So essentially, the priest, played by Donald Pleasance, has inherited this role from Father Carlton. And we enter the Satan Goop Room, which is such a good set. It's a great set.
It is maybe my favorite set in any John Carpenter movie. The Goop Room, the basement of this church, because it's like there are crosses all over everything. Basically, any surface that can have a cross hung from it has one. So just tons of crucifixes. And then later in the movie, when they move all their science equipment in there, there's all these like machines, like these 80s analog bleep and bloop machines taking up all this space, right? So you have this beautiful, gorgeous juxtaposition of like all these crucifixes, all these like lit candles, right? The room is like illuminated entirely by candles, but then when the science stuff is in there, there's like these big electric lights and all these like analog machines. So it's this awesome juxtaposition of religious iconography and like modern science kind of coming together in this room. And then the centerpiece of it is a big glass tube full of swirling green goop clouds. And it nothing has ever looked cooler than this.
Yeah, it's like it looks ancient, which is it's so cool how immediately you just get the sense this thing is old and evil.
Yes,
and it's
7 million years old, we find out.
Yeah, they do mention that later, and it's like covered in like this calcification. It looks like something they pulled out of the bottom of the ocean, but it's this brilliant green goo that's just swirling in this tube.
Yes, and when we say tube, it's like a big ass tube.
Yeah,
it's probably like 8 or 9 feet tall. It's enormous.
And I love that when they enter this room, Carpenter's score hits this really low, like fuzzy note. That just underscores the gravity of the moment and this location.
It feels so evil, which is so like that's what this movie needs, because it's a movie about the devil, right? And in this movie, it's just like, fuck yeah, man! The devil's in that tube, dog.
As much as I have issues with the revelation itself that the devil is. Or not the revelation itself, the way that Carpenter explains the revelation that the devil is a green goop in a tube. The build up to that moment and the little breadcrumb trail that leads to that point is pretty great. I love this line that Donald Pleasance gives where he says, "Can you feel it? It started a month ago. A change in the earth and sky." And he delivers it so well. And that kind of is alluding to the stuff we saw at the beginning with the moon and the sun and the ants and the bugs crawling around everywhere. And I love that. I think Professor Biroc says like, yes, he's felt it. And I think the other characters in the movie, I like that everyone just has this feeling that something is going on.
Yes. Yeah. There's like an intangible evil creeping dread that they're all kind of subjected to when they're in the orbit of this thing. I don't know where I was going with that, so we can cut that out and just go to whatever David's saying next.
There's also this book, this it's not a Bible, but it looks like a super old Bible kind of on this stand that's written in different languages that Donald Pleasance hasn't quite been able to decipher yet. So he wants the professor's team to look at it. So everyone shows up to class and discovers they have a weekend field trip.
That's right. And this is where I started thinking about the Podmaster is going to hate that I am including this reference. But Brian Jordan Alvarez's student character?
Yes.
I was thinking about what if the student was one of these grad students, and he was like he's like, "Well, I am working on my studies, and my professor said we are all going to the church to look at a turd in the basement." They are going to use my science and my mathematical calculation to determine what is inside the turd. Podmaster is
Jesus fucking
very,
Christ.
very angry with me. Later in the movie, he's like, "Hey, you guy, I cannot believe this. It turned out the turd is full of Satan. That is right. It is the devil and the turd." Through my science and my mathematical calculation, we have learned that the devil can possess you by being goop in your mouth.
They tell me I have to go to church to look at Tula Satan, but I want to stay home with my son and my wife.
I roll pop music about
Pop music about the devil.
The devil in the tomb.
Oh, God.
Anyway, that's enough Brian Jordan Alvarez, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Oh, no.
We'll see.
Alice Coopert is stabbing me with a bicycle. Sorry.
Oh, God. So there's going to be other college departments joining them, so that's where we're going to meet some of our other characters in this movie. And this will improve their grades significantly, which I'm glad they're getting something out of this weekend because it's not going to be a good time. But they're at least all going to have A's. They show up to the church, and I love this like shot of the professor seeing this homeless woman kind of like worshiping the sun, and she's got ants all over her face.
Yeah, though I will say, the one thing that I maybe don't love about this movie is its portrayal of unhoused people.
Yes,
because while I agree that this moment is cool and this visual is cool, it is weird that the people that the devil, it seems like, can manipulate to do his bidding the most easily are unhoused people with untreated mental illness. Again, in 1987, people probably weren't thinking about it in the way that we maybe do now, and I'm not saying that makes it okay, right? But it's like, watching this movie in 2023, that is kind of a thing that sticks out to me, where I'm like, okay, maybe not the best optics for your movie to be like people who live on the street and have mental illness that they can't get treatment for are like scary devil people.
Yeah, Carpenter has a few contained thrillers that take place in one location. He also has a few what I would call almost zombie movies, which the antagonists of the film are a faceless, kind of nameless horde that may as well be zombies, but they're not actually zombies. Assault on Precinct 13 is another one,
right?
Where the almost zombies are gang members. And here they're homeless people led by Alice Cooper, which, yeah, I would agree. It's not necessarily the most positive portrayal of unhoused people that we've seen on film.
Yeah, I will say to the movie and John Carpenter's credit, the ensemble cast of scientists is highly racially diverse, right? Like there's a lot of they're not just all white students. There's a lot of diversity in that group, and I was noticing with the unhoused zombies, most of them are white, which I feel like goes a little bit of the way to making the optics of it not as bad as it otherwise could have been, especially in a movie that was made in 1987. Now, not all of the unhoused people are white. Some of them are not. However, I think having diversity in both groups is better than it could have been. Alice Cooper, though, does look like he looks like he's wearing corpse paint, basically. Like his face is so pale white, he looks like he is literally a walking corpse.
And he's kind of rocking like the world's greatest stank face for this whole movie.
Yeah, he just looks like really like pissed off, and he looks really metal. I mean,
yeah. I want to talk about Donald Pleasance.
Yeah,
a little bit. So here, what I've written down is Donald is kind of just doing Dr. Loomis again, but he's talking about Satan the way that he talks about Michael Myers. I think I like that. Okay, I love Donald Pleasance, obviously.
Yeah, and we love Donald Pleasance as Dr. Loomis from Halloween.
So I think I like, if my take is correct, I think it's a good thing that he's doing that.
I disagree with this take. I think that he is, as Loomis, I think he's going really big and broad and over the top a lot of the time, especially in the sequels. In the first one, maybe a little bit less, but in those sequels, he's really he's putting on the cheese factor, you know?
Definitely.
And I think in this movie, he is a little more subtle and a little more understated. And he's still Donald Pleasance, so the man couldn't turn off the gravitas. It's just there, you know? But I think that he is, to match Victor Wong, I think in a way, he is approaching this a little bit more grounded than Dr. Loomis in Halloween kind of ever is. I do agree, like he's still talking about like the pinnacle of all evil, just like he is in those Halloween movies, but he's not screaming and waving a gun around. Now, there are a couple moments in this movie where I do think he achieves full Loomis insanity, but I don't think he quite gets there till the end for me. I think early on, he's a little bit more measured and a little bit more subtle in this role.
And I think where I was coming from was more of Loomis from Carpenter's Halloween. I've seen those Halloween sequels, and he's still doing them at this point in his career. And of course, he's going to pass away. I can't remember exactly when he passes away, but he's only around for a few more years after this movie. But I think his take on the priest is closer aligned to Loomis from Carpenter's Halloween as opposed to the later sequels where he's threatening children and waving guns around. Which I do love.
Yes.
He does keep those Halloween 4, 5, and 6 from being like total train wrecks.
It's always fun to see Donald Pleasance lose his absolute shit.
Yeah, so the scientists and the students show up and they start unloading their gear, and this Alice Cooper and his army
Yes.
of homeless people sort of start kind of gathering and mean mugging the students and surrounding the church.
They do a really cool thing. They do it multiple times in this movie, and I wanted to call it out here, where a lot of the time this army of basically satanically or demonically influenced unhoused people who are sort of the force that is keeping the students inside the church, right? Like trapped in the one location. They do a thing multiple times where they will line up and they're like perfectly spaced. Like they leave the exact same amount of space between each individual body. So they're like lined up, but it looks like unnatural because of how like exactly organized spatially they are in the frame. And it's just a really creepy, cool visual where like people wouldn't line up that way, so it gives you it gives you a visual cue that like something supernatural is happening here, right? And they're not like operating under their own, you know, that their brains are essentially like being controlled.
One thing I do like, if I'm remembering correctly, they don't try to enter the church. They just surround it and prevent people from leaving, and it gives me this impression that like they are there to make sure what is going to take place in this church takes place.
Exactly. And that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, right? Because they don't want to enter the church and interfere, because what they want to have happen is for the devil liquid to infect everyone in the church so that it can spread, right? So they just want to contain the people. They want to make sure that nobody can leave until everybody's infected, pretty much is the situation, I think.
Yeah. We get a few scenes of setting up the other students because we need some expendable income for later. We also meet Dr. Leahy, played by Peter Jason, who's the other professor,
yes,
basically here.
I love this character so much.
Yeah, he's great. It's I think later during this kind of montage of people setting up, but there's this scene where he's like juggling apples and.
Yes, it's when he's getting his girl dinner.
Yeah.
His Dr. Paul Leahy's girl dinner, which is 2 apples, a cigarette, and a whole package of double stuffed Oreos and a cup of coffee.
And he's making a trumpet noise with his mouth. That is one of the comedic moments in this movie that I did laugh at. I don't really laugh at a lot of Dennis Dunn's stuff, as much as I love him. Again, I don't know if the comedy's working for me, but Peter Jason and his mouth trumpet, I do love.
Yeah, Paul Leahy seems like he's actually having a great time at this little church camp out. It seems like this is like the highlight of his week. He seems like he's in such good spirits.
I also noticed that like Donald Pleasance shows up in a limo.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
I don't know where he's getting limo money.
I mean, is he a Catholic priest? Because then maybe it's just
He is Catholic.
It's the diocese, I guess.
Yes.
Well, and you have to imagine that the Catholic Church is aware at the highest levels that this church does in fact contain the physical embodiment of Satan, which is a tube of goo. And so maybe that's why he got the limo there, is because they're like, we got to keep this guy happy because he's in charge of the Satan tube.
But they don't know about the Satan tube.
No. Oh, wait, the church doesn't?
The church doesn't.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about it. Yeah, we find out later that they kind of don't know. Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, I don't know. It was just a detail that I noticed, and it made me question some things. There's this scene where everyone gathers in the goop room in the basement, and Donald Pleasance very ominously says to everyone, he's gaining strength. I can feel it all around us now. And by the way, no one knows what's actually happening yet. No one has been told what they're there for. So it's very weird that Donald Pleasance is looking at this tube of green goo and referring to it as he.
Right.
And it's somehow gathering strength.
Yeah, imagine if you were just like chilling like on a class assignment for college, and some insane priest was like, he's gonna kill us all. It's only a matter of time. Oh, and by the way, on your way in, you saw the most terrifying unhoused person that you've ever seen covered in bugs. Yeah.
Yeah, just ignore the bug people. And
yes.
We're going to go into the church now.
And also, the around here, the windows start getting covered up with worms. Like, the church windows just start getting caked in living worms. And I'm like, if I was one of these students, I would be like, okay, so what's up with the worm window?
Yeah.
Is this related to the tube?
This movie's kind of I want to say sort of montagey, where he's cutting back and forth between a lot of different things, kind of building tension over the course of this movie. So I think we're gonna be a little bit scattered with our plot summary in some cases. We also meet Lisa here, who's played by Anne Yen, who's gonna be important later, but she's basically translating that ancient text that they found in the basement on her computer, and discovers that it has differential equations in there. And according to Dennis Dunn, we hadn't invented differential equations 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. Which is another thing that I just love about this movie. Another thing that just like works so specifically for me. I love ancient math or technology or science that like we find out existed before that thing was supposed to exist. Like, I just think that shit is so cool and like such a fun idea. Also, Lisa, this student who's like getting a doctorate in theology and is the one like translating the book, like David said, is maybe my favorite of the student ensemble. I other than Victor Wong and Donald Pleasance, this is maybe my favorite performance in the movie. I really, really liked everything she was doing.
There's this I have written down here, this Justin Long motherfucker. I don't know his name, but he looks like Justin Long. He's part of Peter Jason's cohort of students. And he decides he's going to leave. I think he's just like, he's going to go home for the night or something like that.
Yeah. This nerdlinger.
And he's listening to Alice Cooper's song, Prince of Darkness, which Alice Cooper wrote for this movie, on his headphones. And he walks outside and he sees this like pigeon nailed to a crucifix,
which is a really cool shot.
Yeah. I guess both of these things come from Alice Cooper's stage show.
Oh.
Where the pigeon crucifix was part of Alice Cooper's stage show. And then Alice Cooper kills him with a broken bicycle.
Yes. Alice Cooper appears in the alley, and it's so cool because his face is like so pale paper white in this movie. And so he's in this dark alley, and his face is just sticking out in like such high contrast to the darkness of the background. And then, yeah, he like slowly starts advancing on this guy and grabs a bicycle. Yeah. And then this guy turns to try and like get away. And then there's other people blocking like the stairs, right? And he turns back around, and Alice Cooper kind of just unceremoniously sticks him with this bicycle. Really, really good blood spurt effect.
Yeah.
I rewinded a couple times to rewatch it because it's so good. But yeah, good blood spray. It's like spraying above and below where the bicycle's coming out of his back. So it's like two little streams. And then he like falls forward and his dead body is propped up by the bicycle. It fucking rules.
Yeah, it's like the back half of a bicycle and the front's been broken off. So there's
like a
sharpened piece of the frame that he can stab him with. And I guess this was based on a gag that Alice Cooper did at his shows where he stabbed someone with his mic stand, and Carpenter went to the show around the time they were talking about working together, and he's like, "Can you do that but with a bike?"
I love that the bike was Carpenter's like addition there.
Yeah,
he was like, "Yes, but bicycle." Yeah, no, it fucking rules. It's a really good kill.
So we get to the Jesus is an alien speech. That's what I have it called.
Ancient aliens.
So basically, Jesus was an alien.
Yes. An interdimensional alien.
And Satan was as well, and the son of Satan is contained in the liquid in the tube.
Satan is contained in the liquid in the tube. The biblical Satan is the one who's in the tube.
Okay.
There is an unknown greater evil who is Satan's father, and they refer to that as the anti-god. And he's still trapped in the other dimension.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Jesus tried to warn us, but
we didn't have
the crucifixion happened.
Well, and also a thing that they say is basically we didn't have the science or technology to prove what he was talking about. So basically they're like, Jesus tried to warn us, but he had to use like metaphor and stuff.
Yeah.
Because the human society hadn't advanced far enough where we could understand what he was talking about. So we had to contain Satan in the tube until we had science and technology that were capable of proving that this is an evil alien.
And I think he entrusts this information to his apostles, who pass it down, and that eventually leads to the creation of the Brotherhood of Sleep.
Right.
And the church decides to characterize evil as something spiritual. We get the biblical version of Satan rather than evil deriving from a scientific force. And here's my problem. That's all fucking awesome. And the movie delivers it in a monologue that's about 30 seconds long. And if you get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the movie, you're going to completely miss it. And I don't need a ton. I just want a little bit more about this crazy alternate universe, this alternate origin of religion that Carpenter's come up with here.
There is a little bit more, though, because the rest of Donald Pleasance's trajectory as a character throughout the rest of this movie is him grappling with this, because he's a priest, right? So this shakes his faith tremendously. And basically every single time you see him on screen for the rest of this movie, it's him being like, I don't know what to do with this information now. And it's less that you learn more about the actual backstory, right? And learn more about the whole ancient aliens idea, right? Basically all you learn is what's in this monologue. But what you do see is the impact that this has on that character, right? And see him like wrestling with the implications of it, which I personally think is enough for me, right? Because it's like that you introduce this idea, and this idea breaks this man, right? And then like that's how you see this idea explored further. And for me, it totally works.
Yeah, and I think Donald Pleasance does do a good job selling this. He has a few conversations with the professor over the course of the movie where he talks about how it shakes his faith, and his faith in the church specifically.
Yes, not so much his faith in God, because he's actually sort of proven right in a way by what he learns, right? Because basically what he learns is that there is absolute evil, right? Satan is in fact empirically real, right? And also like so is Jesus, and by extension probably so is God, right? So it's like it's less his faith in like Jesus and God, and more his faith in the institution of the church that he works for, because they essentially don't know any of this, right? And the truth has been, they espouse to know the truth and be spreading the truth, and the truth is just something different than what he's been taught.
And the Brotherhood of Sleep knew and decided to hide it from the world,
Right.
which he also grapples with. While this conversation is happening, Susan, radiologist, glasses,
Susan, who? Radiologist, glasses.
which they repeat like 3 times in this movie.
I was laughing. I think that's a really good running bit, and also I think it's also a genius running bit because, well, actually, let's get into what happens to Susan, and then I'll talk about why. I think it's a genius
she
running
wanders downstairs and gets a cum shot of Evil in the face.
bit. Yes, she does get evil goop sprayed in her mouth, and then becomes a Satan zombie.
She's kind of the primary Satan zombie for the remainder of the film.
Yes. So the reason that I think the bit where all the other grad students refer to Susan and then somebody else says who, and then they say the radiologist, glasses, is because it makes it clear that this woman has not made a big impression on anybody, right? Like nobody is thinking about who she is or where she's at. Right? And I think that is so smart because she's the first one that gets turned into a zombie, and it explains why it doesn't raise huge red flags for the rest of the group because nobody has been paying attention to her, right? So that being the running bit where it's like the radiologist, glasses, Susan, right? Where everybody's like, oh yeah, that lady's here, right? It's like when she goes missing and gets zombified, it's not going to be like a big thing, So I think the devil picked the right first victim here.
And I think also a lot of the people that get taken out at the beginning of the movie fall into that same category. They're not from Professor Birak's group. They're from Peter Jason's group. And we don't really get a ton of information about them. So it does at least make a little bit more sense when we get on in the movie a little bit later and people are missing and no one's really noticed anything's wrong has happened yet. There's a guy who is suffering from early onset balding in college.
Yes.
Goes wandering around looking for Susan. And she sneaks up behind him and snaps his neck.
Really good neck snap sound effect, by the way. Some Foley artist cracked the shit out of like a whole bunch of celery here. It's like, it's really, really good.
And I think we have a conversation between Victor Wong and Donald Pleasance here, where every particle has an anti-particle, so maybe he's anti-God.
Yes, and they're talking about like the thing on the other side of the veil as opposed to the thing in the tube. Yeah. Also around here is when the dreams start. So another recurring thing that is introduced around here and is included throughout the remainder of the rest of the film is these dreams, which are the viewer sees the dream happening, right? And usually we don't even know who is having the dream until the dream ends and we see a person wake up. But the dream essentially looks like it's a home movie. Like it looks like it's like shot on video.
Yeah, I think when they were shooting it, he filmed the sequence and then played it back on a CRT TV and just filmed the TV close up,
which is so fun and cool. And what we hear we hear a little bit more each time somebody has the dream.
Yeah.
But basically, when the dream is happening, what the dream shows is a visual of the outside of the church that they're all in, right? And the church is being illuminated from within, and there's some kind of dark silhouette coming out of the church, right? And the voiceover it's kind of this creepy, distorted voice, and it's like, this is not a dream, not a dream. What you are seeing is actual events or whatever.
That's actually Carpenter's voice.
Oh, it is?
Which I didn't realize while I was watching it. I found out later, and I should actually go back and look at those scenes again.
That's cool.
But that's fun.
But yeah, so basically there's like voiceover over the dream that is basically saying that it's not a dream and that it's a transmission of some kind, right?
And they're slowly revealing what year the transmission's coming from.
Yes, we are broadcasting from the year 199, and then it'll like cut off, and then the next time you'll like get more information or whatever. And I love this device in this movie. I think it's so fun and so cool.
Yeah. And we get a couple right after each other. Dennis Dunn has the first one. The professor has the second one. He's just like falling asleep in the middle of a conversation with Donald Pleasance in like kind of an office area. And Donald's like, oh, conveniently, by the way, everyone in the Brotherhood of Sleep has the same dream over and over again. And the dream will change and evolve over the course of the film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and conveniently at this point in the movie, but it is actually explained why later. So yeah.
Yeah. We got to talk about Frank. We got to talk about Bugman. So Frank is another one of these kind of more minor characters in the movie that isn't given a ton of backstory.
But he is introduced basically immediately as just a scuzzball.
Yeah.
Because he's like hitting on the radiologist who's married, right? And then he like basically tells another guy that she's like off limits because she's married, even though he was just like harassing her, right? He's just introduced as like the guy that we don't like, pretty much immediately.
So everyone's kind of splintered off when they're talking about the implications of the Jesus as an alien speech. So he's chatting outside with a couple other guys about how weird this is. He says, "This is a joke.
This is caca,"
which is so funny.
Yes.
And he says it again, like after they leave.
Caca. Calling something caca, I feel like, is something that we don't do anymore in the 21st century.
I haven't done it probably since I was like in elementary school.
I feel like...
And I couldn't say shit, but I didn't want to say poop.
I think we need to bring back caca. I like caca. After watching this movie, I was like, why don't people say that stuff is caca more often? Anyway, yes. So Frank is basically like, this is bullshit. I'm leaving.
Yeah. And as if on cue, the army of zombie unhoused people surround him, as well as Susan, who is possessed by the evil goo at this point.
Yeah, and Susan actually comes out of the church at this point.
Yeah.
And it seems like she's kind of psychically directing the rest of the people to attack Frank.
And I think this is the correct order of events. He starts turning into bugs, and then he gets stabbed by someone with scissors who kind of runs out of an alley. And we get this really like tight close-up of a gloved hand holding the scissors, like a giallo film.
It's really giallo.
Which is the other thing I forgot to mention, is that Carpenter was influenced by Dario Argento's Inferno specifically while making this movie, which I haven't seen, but I know a lot of like the tropes of giallo, and that kind of the gloved assailant with the sharp object is a huge thing from those giallo films.
And even like the handle of the scissors is like bright red.
Yeah.
Like it's very, this moment is really, really giallo.
So I think he gets turned into bugs and then stabbed.
Yes.
Which is quite a way to go.
I think you're right, because in my notes I have this as one bullet point is bugs, 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 and then the next note is very giallo kill here with the scissors. So yeah, I think you're right. He starts turning into bugs and then is stabbed.
Yeah, man, this is a hard part to talk about because there's just so much happening all at once.
Yeah, so basically, like, what sort of happens here? More people are having the dream here, right? So Frank has been killed. We don't really see what happens to him after that. More people are having the dream. They're still kind of doing their science research, whatever. And then I think the next thing that happens, the next big thing that happens, is Lisa, the theologist who's like looking at the book or whatever. She gets gooped by Susan.
Yeah,
I think is the next thing that happens.
Susan crawls on top of her in bed, and there's a bit of
because Lisa goes to take a nap because she's been working all night.
Yeah, maybe I am reading into this a little bit too much as a heterosexual man, but there's like a hint of Lisa being like, are you trying to make out with me or something like that?
Yeah. And she almost, I agree with you. I think that's there, and it almost reads to me as if she's not necessarily opposed to the idea, but she's kind of like, not right now. which I'm like, this movie is maybe very subtly giving us some information about Lisa's sexuality in this moment, because she's not like, ew, get off me, or like, what are you doing? She's just kind of like, I'm just trying to sleep, is kind of the vibe that she gives.
And I don't remember exactly, we'll get there when we get there, but I think the lady who gets sore lady, the lady who's covered in sores for the rest of this movie, and is basically implied to be giving birth to the Antichrist.
She essentially becomes the devil. She is possessed.
Oh yeah.
The rest of them are sort of devil zombies, but she basically is the devil at the end of this movie.
I think that's how she gets got too, is Susan or Lisa crawl on top of her and vomit in her mouth.
Yes. And we should say that there is a reading of this movie where it's kind of like an AIDS allegory as well.
Yeah, I did hear that.
And this is kind of how that comes out is basically like the demonic possession transfers by fluids, and sometimes it is kind of framed as like a pseudo sexual thing, right? So that kind of gives you an idea of why people might think that this is AIDS related.
So now Lisa's possessed, and she's back in the computer room, and this other guy wanders in as she's typing over and over, I live.
It's so good. It's so creepy because she's typing on the computer and you can't really see what she's typing. And then as the guy gets closer and closer to the screen, the camera gets closer and closer to the screen. And then the camera like cuts to a close up of the screen, and it's just I live ! Over and over and over and over and over again. Very, very The Shining. Very all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy.
And I'm sure you want to talk about the next thing that she types.
Oh yeah. So yes. So there's the I lives, and then there is on the screen. It goes black, and in the middle of the screen, this shot is just a close-up of the screen itself, and it says, "You will not be saved by the Holy Ghost. You will not be saved by the god plutonium. In fact, you will not be saved." And that's the scariest and coolest thing that has ever happened in a horror movie.
It is one of the coolest things in this movie.
It fucking rocks. I love you will not be saved by the Holy Ghost. You will not be saved by the god plutonium. Because I was talking about before, how I love this movie's fusion of the spiritual and the scientific. And I love that the devil, right, the ultimate evil, who exists in this movie as something spiritual and something material and scientific and like empirical, right? Is aware, essentially, that there are representatives from both groups here, right? And he's like, your God can't help you, but also your science can't help you, is kind of what he's communicating here. And it's so, like, it gives me chills. I fucking love it.
So the guy who's in there checking on her, Susan traps him in there, and then Lisa kind of lunges at him, and then they like kiss him and drink him to death. There's like sucking sounds.
Yes, and this guy, I think the possession doesn't really take. Oh, this guy's name is Calder, by the way. The student name. The possession doesn't take very well in him, I think, because while the rest of them kind of end up as mindless zombies, he's like singing Amazing Grace later and like looking at himself in the mirror and crying. I'm part of me thinks he maybe resists the infection a little bit.
Yeah, he gives a very good performance because he is crying and laughing, and he's doing such intense acting with his face. And yeah, later on in the movie, he's just singing Amazing Grace while kind of crying to himself and carrying this chair up the stairs that he then stabs himself in the neck with. Like,
yeah,
there's something interesting about how much pain he seems to be in, and everyone else, it's affecting them differently.
Right. My reading of this, I think, was just that his body or his spirit or something was resisting the possession in a way that like the other people weren't. Maybe.
Yeah. The rest of the group, they meet up and they talk about the dreams a little bit more and what's causing it and what it might means. They bring up the idea of tachyons being used to essentially transmit like a video from the future.
Yes.
We get into some more of the quantum physics babble.
Yes. So the only theory that's really presented about these dreams in the movie, so ergo the one that the audience has to accept as the truth, is that these dreams that people have been having are, again, video messages from the future, right? And that people or aliens or whatever in the future have figured out how to send broadcasts to the past for people to pick up as like.
So while they're having this discussion about the dreams, Frank shows up, who is now completely transformed into Bugman.
Yes, he's a bug zombie.
And he says, I have a message for you, and you're not going to like it. Pray for death. While these bugs are like swarming around him, and he's slowly turning into them.
Which, by the way, pray for death is one of my favorite, like, scary horror movie things that an antagonist can say. Like, I love, especially in the context of this movie with like all the religious trappings and stuff, I just love that that's what he says, is pray for death. It's just like, it's so good.
Yeah, and let it be known that the Greatest Movie Ever Made podcast are big fans of characters turning into bugs in horror movies. The only other one I can think of is Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
This is now the second time we've brought up that movie on the podcast, and we will eventually do an episode on it. But yes, that's the only other one I can think of as well.
But,
well, I guess in Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie Boogie sort of turns into bugs. I mean, he's
already bugs.
Right, he's already bugs, but like he goes from not looking like bugs to looking like bugs. So I think that counts.
I guess that counts. Yeah.
The Podmaster is deciding if it counts. Okay,
it counts.
The Podmaster's verdict is that it counts. So that's 3 movies where someone turns into bugs.
Yeah. So Frank's head falls off and his body just completely collapses into bugs.
David, his head falls off. This is a movie where a man's head falls off and he turns into bugs.
And I like the movie. It's a good movie.
Falls off and he turns into a pile of bugs.
In fact, I'd argue that's one of the things I like the most about this movie.
Fucking rules. It's the best thing that has ever happened in any movie ever. It's so good, and the shot is so good. The shot where his head falls off, and then there's like a wide shot where it's basically just like he's standing like down in the parking lot or whatever. And it's like pitch dark. It's so dark around him.
Yeah.
And he's wearing like a light gray suit. So he is like this very, very bright spot in this very dark, like background. And after his head falls off, the body like crumples a couple times and then fully collapses. And any other horror director could have had a guy's head fall off and have the guy turn into bugs, and it would have ruled. Only John Carpenter can have a guy's head fall off and he turns into bugs, and not only does it rule, but it's fucking beautiful to look at. It's like gorgeous filmmaking. And I'm like, this movie is better than it has any right to be. It's better than it needed to be because of the artistry behind the camera coming from that man. I just have to gush about this visual because it's so fucking good.
No, I'd agree. I think this movie does look great, and it's beautifully shot. I didn't look up if Dean Cundy did this one too.
I think he did.
It definitely feels like it. And this shot is great. He's just completely enshrouded in darkness, and then collapses into bugs, and everyone's like,
"God damn, it's so
oh."
good.
I think weird stuff is going on. They finally realized.
Did everyone else see Frank's head fall off and he turned into bugs? You guys, you are not gonna believe this. A guy who was one of the students in my class, just his head fell off and he turned into a pile of bugs. I think this has something to do with the dude of Satan in the basement. Sorry.
While they're all distracted by Bugman, Susan and Lisa move the Satan tube into like the sleeping quarters to possess another woman who's sleeping. And this, I don't. Where's her name? I don't. She's Sore Lady. She's a lady who's covered in sores.
Yes.
She's going to become the Antichrist over the course of this
She's
movie.
not covered in sores yet.
She's not covered in sores yet.
She's just regular now.
Yeah, she wasn't born with a skin condition.
No, yeah. We're not just mocking this woman's appearance. She later is possessed by the devil and becomes covered in sores.
Dennis Dunn comes into this room at this point and sees that Satan's ecto cooler has started leaking onto the ceiling, and it's clearly like an upside down shot with some like reverse photography, and it's really cool. It looks this green liquid is flooding the ceiling. It is leaking upwards onto the ceiling, and a pool is collected on the ceiling.
They do this shot a few times with the liquid on the ceiling, and it's such simple movie magic, because it's literally like they filmed water dripping downwards and then turned the shot upside down.
Yeah.
That's literally all they did, and it's so simple but so effective, and it looks really cool.
And there's this other great shot of the lady who's sleeping, who will soon develop sores.
Yes. Who has just been infected recently, right?
The liquid is now like pouring out of her eyes and mouth, like
upward, onto
like
the
shooting
ceiling,
upwards too,
out of her eyes and mouth, and it's really, really cool.
I think this is another kind of like giallo sort of image, maybe something like from Lucio Fulci or something like that.
Yeah, especially because the colors are so like vibrant here.
And I
it's
forgot
very
to-
like vivid green.
I forgot to mention, but like earlier in the movie, she bumps her arm into something. It's a really minor moment, and the bruise has now developed into this mark. I
Yes.
tried to look up what it was, but it's like an upside down cross, and the bottom of the cross, which would be the head of the cross, is kind of curved.
It sort of reminded me of the Ghost G, the band Ghost. How they
Yeah.
do like the inverted cross for the G. Yeah. So she's essentially been marked, and we infer that this mark essentially is Satan marking her as his host, right? So now that she's been possessed, she, unlike the rest of them who are just kind of zombies, she is becoming like fully Satan.
Yeah. Peter Jason also gets possessed in this scene, kind of a short bit where Lisa, I think, throws up in his mouth too, really quickly.
Right.
And-
Yeah, it starts moving really, really fast.
Yeah, it really picks up. And so Dennis Dunn moves into the closet to barricade himself in there, where he's going to spend the rest of the movie.
Yes, because he's trapped in there with the woman who is actively transforming into Satan, right? And then also Lisa and Susan are in there, so he's outnumbered and he's hiding.
And there's a lot more darkness in this scene. These scenes, they're really well lit, but lots of just really moody shadows and darks that contrast well with the actors and the rest of the lighting in the movie.
Yeah.
Again, really well shot film.
Right, and I love how the darkness in here. If I could just get on my soapbox a little bit and harp about how modern movies are bad at this.
You've had so many soapboxes this episode.
Must
I bring out another one for you?
I'm gonna go to the soap factory and just steal all the boxes, so that I have a limitless supply. No, but just to harp on this for just a second, modern movies like suck at this generally, which is things are dark in this portion of the film, but you can see everybody's fucking face every single time there's a person on camera, regardless of how close or far away they are, because it's well lit darkness, right? So it's like you have all these shots of Walter looking out into the room, and you can see Lisa and Susan's faces even though they are immersed in darkness, right? And I'm like, why is that so hard for people in 2023 to fucking do? Why, when you go see a movie now, is it like, oh, this is the dark scene where I can't fucking see anybody? You know? I don't know. But it's, to your point, it's really good here.
Yeah. And the rest of the group barricade themselves in the room next to Dennis. So Brian and what's her name? Catherine, the redhead, the romantic
Yes.
lead. The professor and a couple other minor characters, I think, barricade themselves in the room next to Dennis Dunn, and Donald Pleasance is kind of off on his own in another room where he's like hiding behind a boiler or something.
Yeah.
And there's a mirror in there, which will be important later.
And he's eventually trapped in there with Calder, with the guy who the possession maybe didn't take very well, who by this point has already, we alluded to it earlier, but has already stabbed himself in the neck. So he's got like a big bloody bandage on his neck, and he's like crying and looking at himself in the mirror, and it's very weird and creepy.
Yeah. And we get the sense of like time passing. I think they basically spend the next day trapped in these locations while they're just kind of waiting for the next night to come.
Yes, and at some point, the people in the one room realize that Walter is in the room next door to them, and they realize, because Walter's trapped in the closet, he feels like he can't leave, because if he opens the door, he's going to get attacked by Lisa and Susan.
Yeah, there's this great shot where they show that it's the next morning, and Lisa and Susan are standing in the same spot and have not moved from where they were last night.
Yes, which is very creepy and weird. So they essentially hear Walter through the wall, realize that he's in there, and the people in the other room start, like the professor and Brian and Catherine, start digging through the wall to try and get Walter essentially to climb, tunnel through the wall, right, and climb into the room with them, so that he is out of the most immediate danger, right? And it's funny too, because while they're digging through the wall here, they're getting updates from Walter about how the lady with all the sores who's being possessed by Satan is doing, right? Because he's like talking about how she essentially gets like a big pregnant belly, and is like all covered in sores, and he's like, oh, there's like tissue changes and all this, and so they're getting updates from Walter through the wall, like shouting through the wall. And at one point, I just wrote this down because I thought it was a very funny moment. I think Catherine is like, keep watching her closely and tell us anything that you see. And his response is, I have to go to the bathroom. Which I think is really funny because he's been trapped in this closet for like a full day.
He's also like shouting jokes at Susan and Lisa almost to see if he can like break them.
Yes.
And they're not giving him anything.
Yeah.
We get a sequence where Brian tries to jump into an alley from the window, but the unhoused people start surrounding him, so he climbs back in.
Yes, and I think around here, or maybe it was a little earlier, there is a weird moment where I think it's Catherine just assumes that all of these unhoused people have schizophrenia.
Right.
She's talking about their behavior earlier and like talking about how schizophrenic people have like patterns that they'll repeat or whatever. And I'm like, why does she just assume that this horde of unhoused people who are behaving strangely are all schizophrenic? She doesn't know. Like, they haven't been diagnosed. I wanted to call it out as a strange moment. But yeah, so I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Brian basically tries to escape to see if the homeless horde will attack him or not. And they do, so he crawls back into the church and is basically like, well, we can't escape that way.
Yeah. We get another dream at this point. Catherine has the dream this time around, and I think it's basically the same. We just get an extra number added to the year.
Right.
Like we have in the others. I like this moment where Professor Birac kind of makes this connection between the ants who have swarmed around. They're like driven to a higher purpose beyond their control, or their knowledge. He makes that connection between the ants, the unhoused people, and their colleagues who are now possessed.
Right. Basically, the inference here is that they're all being mind controlled by the tube of Satan goo.
Yeah. And Donald Pleasance has spent basically all day reading his Comfort Bible to himself, and just like I wrote Comfort Bible. I don't know why.
I think he is clutching it to his chest. He's like hugging it like a security blanket.
And right? he's reading passages from it to himself, kind of hiding in the corner. While what was his name? What did you say his name was? Carlton?
Carlton, yeah. Or no, not Carlton. Sorry. Let me find it in my notes.
The guy who's been laughing and singing Amazing Grace and stuff.
Yes, Calder.
Calder's been basically looking at this mirror all day and laughing to himself and crying to himself.
Yeah.
And I do like the despair that Donald Pleasance has in this moment in his performance.
This is legitimately like a heartbreaking moment in this movie, this performance, where his faith has been so shaken and so shattered, and he's here like in mortal danger, just like reading his Bible and like clinging to his faith, right, to get him through this, even though he has had this revelation that has like shaken his faith so much. And it's like he's just like a broken man in this scene. Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, there's this point where Donald Pleasance is like pleading with God to show himself. And I think that's, yeah, it's a really good moment for his character. At this point, night has fallen, and the possessed zombies are starting to break through the barricades again.
Yeah, and I think the thing that really leads them to start full on attacking again is that the lady who's possessed by Satan, like the devil possessed woman, wakes up. And at this point, her skin has basically fully melted off. She's basically like, she looks like hamburger meat.
Yeah.
So like her skin's all gross, and she's like all just fully possessed and is walking around like as the devil. And she's like she has like telekinetic powers. Like she has like she's able to move things around with her mind and shit. But her waking up kind of gets the other zombies into attack mode.
Yeah. The balding guy spits on one of the guys who's held up with the main group of people. I don't even know the character's name. He doesn't really matter. He's, again, just kind of there to be expendable.
He does, by the way. The rest of them are kind of believably grad students. This guy looks like he's 41 years old. Which I guess you can be a 41-year-old grad student, but it is funny because he looks older than Professor Leahy does.
I like this part where Peter Jason tries to spit on Brian, but Brian just clocks him in the face with his 2x4 that he's holding. And Dennis Dunn finally breaks through the wall to get to the other room.
Yeah, like just in the nick of time, like the other zombie arms are like reaching through to grab him, like right when he's getting through the wall.
And they pull him out. And the lady who's not the lady who's possessed, but the lady who is basically going to become the Antichrist, Sword Lady. I just have her written down as Sword.
The devil.
There's this scene where she's like looking in a compact mirror, and the mirror turns to liquid, which was actually mercury. They used liquid mercury for this, and and like fake hands. And she pushes her fingers through the mirror, and we see a brief glimpse of her pushing through to the other dimension.
Yes, and it's a really cool shot, just these fingers coming through on the other side. It's like fingers floating in like the void. It's like really, it's visually really cool.
Yeah, and this other dimension is depicted as very dark. It's like just dark underwater photography.
Yeah, it's kind of like watery darkness. It reminds me of like very, very, very deep sea, right? Like the depths of the ocean.
Yeah. Very, very simplistic, but works to sell the moment, I think.
Yeah. So we get the idea here that the devil essentially has the power to transform mirrors into portals to this other dimension. But she needs a bigger mirror. The compact mirror isn't big enough.
And conveniently, Donald Pleasance is hiding downstairs in a room with a bigger mirror.
Yes.
So I love this where both Lisa and Susan get thrown out of the window.
Yes,
basically the exact same way.
A double defenestration in this movie.
They both like just get kind of flipped out of this window in the same way.
Yes, just chuck these zombies out this window.
The lady covered in sores. Man, I really should have learned her name. She wanders down to where the priest is and sees that big mirror, and she reaches her hand fully through this, like it's like a floor to ceiling full size mirror.
Yes, and the whole time she's going, Father, because it's the devil trying to bring the anti-god back from the other dimension.
So Donald has this fire axe, and he cuts her hand off.
Yes,
and there's this great shot of the hand just floating away in the void of the dimension.
And then her hand fucking grows back. It just, another one pops right out.
So what do? You try to cut the head off.
David.
He cuts the head off, and she puts the head back on.
David.
Yeah.
I cannot understand why you are not as passionate about this film as I am, when a thing that happens in this movie is that Donald Pleasance, with a fire axe, cuts off the head of a woman possessed by the devil, and then the woman picks up her own head off the floor by the hair and puts it back on. That's the best thing that has ever happened. It's the coolest thing in any movie. Donald Pleasance decapitates a woman possessed by the devil with a fire axe, and she sticks her head back on. David!
It's a good movie. I don't know what you want me to say. It's a good movie. It's a good movie. I like the movie. It's a good part in the good movie.
It's
not the best thing I've ever seen.
I disagree.
Okay. Jesus. So she reaches through the mirror again.
Yeah.
And we see this
because basically Donald Pleasance is like, oh, I'm fucked. I think she maybe like uses a little force push to get him out of the way or something.
Yeah.
Or chucks him or something. I'm not sure.
And I do remember the Foley during her hand growing back, just like it's almost like the sound that they would use in a movie where like vines are attacking someone. Like, like Evil Dead vine noises, or the way this hand just immediately grows back. And we see this like large devil hand.
Yes.
Push out through the mirror and grab her. I don't like this.
You don't like this?
I like the idea of the anti-god reaching through. I don't like that it's kind of basically just a traditional devil hand.
Yeah,
I wish it was something a little bit more alien.
It's a big red devil hand. I don't know. I like it. I like that this movie is balancing the serious and the campy. And this is a moment of camp that works for me because it's a big red devil hand. I don't know. What do you want the devil's hand to look like? It could be like a Lovecraftian tentacle or something, but a big red devil hand works for me. By the way, I looked it up. Sore Lady's name is Kelly.
Okay.
That's her name. Kelly. So anytime we've said Sore Lady or Lady Possessed by Satan, just mentally insert Kelly in that place. I say mentally because the Podmaster will not be doing that shit.
She's had enough of a nightmare editing this shitty podcast. So.
Anyway, yeah.
Brian tries to strangle the guy who's been laughing to himself this whole time with the 2x4, which doesn't seem like the best application for the 2x4. I think he should just try to whack him in the head again. And they kind of wrestle around a bit. But then this really great, awesome thing happens where Catherine pushes Kelly through the mirror.
Yeah, so Catherine kind of, I think, picks up because they all know about like the anti-God thing.
Yeah.
And I think she sort of picks up on what's happening. She's like, oh shit. The anti-God is entering this dimension. This must be stopped. And she kind of has a moment where she's conflicted. She's like, do I do this? Because I'm pretty sure I'm going to die if I do this. But yeah, she like charges at Kelly and pushes her through the mirror. And Catherine also goes through the mirror with her.
And Donald Pleasance seizes the opportunity to chuck his axe at the mirror, and the mirror shatters.
And when he throws the axe, he yells, Christo Domino! Which means Christ is Lord in Latin.
Okay, I didn't catch. I know he yelled something, but I couldn't.
Yes,
catch what it was.
He screams Christo Domino and throws a fire axe at the mirror, locking them all in the hell dimension.
And there's this great shot of Catherine looking back in the hell dimension, floating, trying to reach back through the mirror in despair, and this kind of like light flickers out as the dimension closes, she's trapped.
It looks a lot like the scenes in Get Out, where the protagonist is kind of floating in the sunken place and sees the events that are happening outside the sunken place, like on like a little TV screen. It's a very similar shot, and I know that Jordan Peele is a huge Carpenter fan, and I'm wondering if this was a direct influence on how he shot that stuff.
It would make sense to me that he did that. I would have to go back and rewatch Get Out, but it is from my memory, it's a very similar visual.
Yeah.
And that's basically the end of this whole Prince of Darkness scenario that these guys have lived through.
Yes, so like when the devil gets pushed to the other side and locked in there with the anti-God, everybody who was possessed gets unpossessed, but they're basically all dead now anyway.
They're still dead. There's this montage of like smoke kind of exiting their mouths.
The demons enter or exit their body like a vape hit. They just exhale the demon vapor.
And the unhoused people just kind of wander away.
They're like, oh, that was weird.
Yeah, basically. And the priest is carried away on a stretcher, and I like this part where I think he reaches out to the professor and he says, "We stopped it through the grace of God."
Yes. And everybody's kind of being tended to. It's one of my favorite parts of any horror movie, which is just a bunch of emergency vehicles in a parking lot, and everybody who was involved in the horror throughout the last 2 hours is like in trauma blankets and like, oh, I can't believe we survived. But yeah, so they take away Pleasance on a stretcher, and everybody who has survived, which is basically I think just Brian, Professor Birack, the priest, and then Dennis Dunn are the only ones who made it out.
Those are the people who make it out. Brian is still standing by the mirror in the church, just kind of trying to process what just happened. And we transition from that to the final dream of the movie, where he sees a figure exiting the church.
And this time, the figure is not a mysterious robed figure like it has been every other time. Now it is
Catherine.
Clearly Catherine. Yeah.
The year
1999.
Yep. So these guys are transmitting from the year 1999, getting ready for Y2K.
Which I guess in 1987 seemed like it was a ways off still.
Well, yeah, and I think that there was just I even remember being a kid. I don't necessarily remember Y2K, but I remember a lot of hype around the idea of we were entering a new millennium.
Right. Yeah.
And stuff like Terminator kind of played up that like end of the 20th century being this big moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Some like excitement, but also anxiety that goes along with like the millennium changing.
Right.
Yeah.
And he wakes up. We get this kind of fake out scare that I don't exactly like the way that it plays out, because I'm just not a big fan of like people waking up from a dream and then getting scared.
I like the fake out jump scare, and I like it partially because, first of all, I think it's really effective, but also I like that the fake out jump scare, so he wakes up from the dream, turns over, and the fake out jump scare is Catherine, not Kelly, all in the devil possessed hamburger meat makeup, right? So that's the thing I like about it, is basically him waking up from the dream and getting the double scare, which is essentially a dream within a dream, right? Is him kind of getting a premonition that the devil has transferred from Kelly to Catherine.
Yeah.
And that's what the dream is about.
Yeah, I like that implication a lot. I just don't necessarily like the way that it's played out here, but I don't know another way that he would have done it. And then he finally wakes up for real.
Yeah.
And walks over to the mirror in his bedroom and slowly reaches toward it. And the movie cuts to black.
The final shot is his fingers almost touching the mirror. And it cuts before the moment that he actually makes contact. I love that final shot.
John Carpenter...
I'm getting chills right now just talking about it.
John Carpenter consistently has great endings.
Yes.
I would say even a couple of the movies that are... I've seen all of his theatrically released movies. I watched them all within the last year or so. Even the ones that are towards the bottom of my list, like Escape from L.A. and Ghosts of Mars, to their credit, have really good endings. Ghosts of Mars is like, oh, I kind of want to watch that movie and not the movie that I've just been watching for the last 2 hours. And the Escape from L.A. ending is totally awesome and fitting of a better movie. But this is a way better movie than those, and I think this ending rules.
Yeah, it's a great ending. And that's Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
From 1987.
Directed by the legendary John Carpenter.
Yes.
So, Justice, you've already answered this question, but the people want to hear it again.
Yeah, you can ask me anyway.
Is Prince of Darkness the greatest movie ever made?
Yes! Yes, Prince of Darkness is the greatest movie ever made. David! I've said enough about this movie. I don't need to say any more than that. Yes. This is the greatest movie ever made. David, is Prince of Darkness from 1987 the greatest movie ever made? And answer carefully, because this is my house.
I have a message for you, and you're not going to like
You
it.
son of a bitch.
No.
Fuck.
This is a good, solid, underseen, underloved John Carpenter movie.
I'm gonna fucking kill you.
It's a good movie, Justin.
It's a good... Yeah, all right.
But I think there are like 10 other John Carpenter movies that I like more than
10?
Yeah.
This is in my top 3.
This is at the bottom of my good John Carpenter movies. And there's a few that it's like basically on par with. So I could kind of pick and choose depending on the day. But I think it has a really cool premise and a really good build up to that premise that the movie doesn't live up to. I think it lacks some of the stronger characters and performances from his other movies. And while there are good moments of horror, like Bugman, like Kelly having her arm cut off and then her head cut off and them growing back, I think the horror elements are more underwhelming for me in comparison to his other films. He has this really, really good premise, and then it kind of just becomes a body snatchers movie. And I think a movie with the premise that the devil is a tube of green goo. I don't know what the horror, what is better than the horror that we're giving in this movie, but I don't know. I wish it was something else. But I think the atmosphere's there. It looks great. The music's great. Again, the music has been playing for basically the entire runtime of the movie, with probably a few exceptions. So it's good, and I would say if you have only seen The Thing or Halloween or Escape from New York, give this one a shot.
I am gonna do my best to shake this one off, because you were very complimentary about the movie, and I know you like the movie. We'll just have to agree to disagree here. So, if you do end up watching,
It's a good movie. It's just not the greatest movie ever made.
It's the greatest movie ever made.
Fuck you.
So if you, dear listener, end up watching Prince of Darkness, or if you've already seen it and you want to weigh in on whether David is right or I'm right, I'm right. I'm the one who's right here. Then you can let us know on social media, or send us an email, or send us smoke signals or whatever. Yeah. That is Prince of Darkness.
That's Prince of Darkness. Tweet about the show. Talk about the show. Tell your friends about the show. We got our analytics back from our first episode, because our first episode, when we're recording, aired last week, and 18 people listened to the show.
Yeah. So hello to all 18 of you. We love you. We love each one of you 18. Well, David and I are probably two of those people. So yeah, the 16 of the rest of you, we love you very much, and you're the light of our lives.
Go out and if you're one of those 16 people, go out and tell a couple of your friends about us.
Just subscribe to our podcast on your friends' devices, on your mom's device, your siblings. The holidays are going to be coming up pretty soon. Just anytime you're at a party, just grab everybody's phone and subscribe to this podcast.
And we are continuing our Halloween programming, our Halloween horror-thon. Again, I stole that name from Season of the Witch, so maybe we won't actually call it that.
Halloween horror-thon's
I
good.
think it's going to be an annual thing, so
yeah.
I would like it to be. We are talking about the original Friday the 13th from 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, because when it releases, it will be Thursday the 12th.
Yes, so we are going to be coming at you with some beautiful Camp Crystal Lake shenanigans next week.
We get to visit our good friend Tom Savini once again.
Yes, Tom Savini, baby. See little baby Kevin Bacon in that movie, too.
We get to hang out with Pamela Voorhees, the forgotten slasher of the Friday the 13th films.
That's right. So, tune in next week for that. Should be a fun little conversation on that classic of the genre.
And we will see you then. Y'all take care. And as always,
later dipshits.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horror-thon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Greatest Movie Ever Made. Please remember to leave us a rating and a review, and to subscribe to the show wherever you listen. We appreciate you supporting the show and spreading the word. Tell your friends to listen, tell your enemies to listen, tell your mom to listen. If your neighbor has an unsecured Bluetooth speaker, connect to it and play an episode. You can follow us on social media at TGMEM_podcast. And if you've got a movie that you want us to talk about, send us an email at thegreatestmoviepodcast@gmail.com. Okay, that's all for now. We hope you beautiful people all come back next week for another episode.